27 years have gone by, and I'm just so glad to see that someone is finally being held accountable for the murder of Tupac. So I'm just stoked.
A man in custody accused of ordering the murder of rapper Tupac Shakur 27 years ago.
Duane Davis was the leader and shot caller of the Southside Compton Crips.
Police say Duane Keffe D Davis ordered the hit on Tupac Shakur. So who is Keffe D? We look at 6 things you need to know about the man accused of ordering the murder of Tupac. Welcome to Law and Crime Sidebar podcast. I'm Angenette Levy. Tupac Shakur's family and his fans have been waiting 27 years for someone to be held accountable in Tupac's murder. That day is now here. Duane Davis, whose street name is Keffe D, faces a charge of open murder with a deadly weapon and a gang enhancement in Tupac's murder on September 7, 1996. Keffe D is a member of the Southside Compton Crips. Some people say he's actually a gang leader. Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur were affiliated with the Bloods.
Tupac Shakur was an artist who was signed with Death Row Records. And that Death Row Records and its CEO, Marion Suge Knight, were closely affiliated with the Mob Piru criminal street gangs, and that they had an ongoing feud with the Southside Compton Crips. Duane Davis was the leader and shot caller of the Southside Compton Crips.
On September 7th, Keffe D, his nephew Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, Terrence Brown, and DeAndre Smith were all in Las Vegas. So were Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. The group encountered one another at the MGM Grand during the Mike Tyson fight. Tupac jumped Orlando Anderson over an old beef. Then he, Suge Knight, and their entourage left the casino for a party elsewhere. That's when the plan to kill Tupac took shape, according to Las Vegas Metro Police.
Duane Davis began to devise a plan to obtain a firearm and retaliate against Suge Knight and Mr. Shakur for what occurred inside the hotel against Mr. Anderson. After Davis obtained a gun, he entered into a white Cadillac along with Terrence Brown, DeAndre Smith, and Orlando Anderson. Based on our investigation, this is where we know.
The first officer on scene that night was Chris Carroll. He held Tupac in his arms and asked him who shot him.
So I was asking him, what happened? Who shot you? Who did this? And he, for the first time, he's kind of acknowledging my presence, and he's looking in my eyes, and I'm looking at his, and I could tell he's trying to get a breath together because he's having a very hard time breathing. And he looks at me and he opened his mouth and he said, "F you." And after he said it, he kind of gurgled and coughed. His eyes rolled back. He lost consciousness. So that would be the last thing that he ever said in his life.
Tupac Shakur died days later after being taken off life support. Suge Knight stuck to the no snitching street code, but Knight knew exactly who fired at them from a white Cadillac. With no one talking, police said they couldn't make an arrest. But years later, Keffe D would find himself in a jam because of his drug dealing. He would confess to his role in the killing of Tupac Shakur, but the confession was called a proffer and couldn't be used to prosecute him.
So Orlando shot him across Dre?
He leaned over on the window, he rolled down the window, popped.
Keffe D's proffer was played in the documentary Murder Rap. That was the first time the public heard it. Keffe D laid out in detail what happened that night and why to LAPD Detective Greg Kading and others. I spoke with Greg Kading about Keffe D being indicted all of these years later.
Yeah, I'm just elated. Thank you for having me, first of all. It's been a long time coming. I mean, better late than never, they say, but holy smokes, it's 27 years have gone by, and I'm just so glad to see that someone is finally being held accountable for the murder of Tupac. So I'm just stoked.
How big of a gang leader or what have you was Keffe D in Compton? Because I've heard people say he's a gang leader. Some people laugh when you call him a leader of the South Compton Crips. I mean, how big of a deal was he, or was he just kind of like a blowhard?
He was relevant because he was dealing a lot of dope. And because he had a lot of dope, he had a lot of money. And because he had a lot of money, he had influence. So it was just those things. But he is a bit of a blowhard. He's not like his nephew Orlando, who was the actual gunman who killed Tupac. That was a serious committed gangster who was a killer. Keffe D is a little bit more of a figurehead, so to speak. And he's definitely a legend in his own mind, but all things considered, he's not who he presents himself to be in the sense of this big, dangerous, infamous gangster.
As I mentioned, Keffe D told Greg Kading the entire story about what happened the night Tupac was murdered in the proffer that could not be used in court. From the fight at the MGM Grand to the shooting of Tupac and Suge Knight in the black BMW, Kading said it was frustrating to see someone confess to murder, but unable to take the case to court.
You've heard the phrase before, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And we couldn't use his self-incriminating confession back in 2009. But because of that, he had this false perception that he had immunity. And so he began to go out and boast publicly about his role in the murder, and that's not protected. That can all be used against him. So in essence, he talked himself right into jail. And so to see his confession being brought to light, his involvement being brought to light, and then his arrest and pending prosecution being pending, I'm so glad to see history finally getting set straight. This is not an unsolved murder. It has just been an unprosecuted murder.
Orlando Anderson was killed in 1998. The other passengers in that vehicle are also dead. This all begs the question, if police have had a confession that couldn't be used in court for all of these years, how can Keffe D now be prosecuted? The answer is quite simple, according to law enforcement.
Who shot Tupac?
They keep it for the code of the streets. It just came from the backseat, bro.
Keffe D did a lot of talking about that night after his release from prison on drug charges.
Mr. Davis's own words reinvigorated our case in 2018.
Had he not confessed to us, and then we made that confession public when I published the book and the documentary came out, and so we basically exposed it all as to what took place in the investigation and what his involvement was in Biggie's murder. But if you understand the ego of Keffe D, he resented that somebody else was telling the story other than him. And so that whole thing prompted him to then go out and publicly boast about his involvement. So yeah, one thing kind of led to another, but that foundation of the original confession, everything in motion.
Last July, Las Vegas Metro Police executed a search warrant at Keffe D's home in Henderson, Nevada.
Face the house, slowly walk back towards the sound of my voice. You're doing good. Appreciate your cooperation.
Word started to spread that a grand jury had been impaneled to investigate Tupac Shakur's murder. But as the weeks passed, hope started to fade that anything would come of it.
I literally texted my old partner this morning prior to any of this breaking news about the arrest. And I literally texted my old partner, Darren Dupree, this morning and said, what in the hell is taking so long? And the next text I get is actually from Mike Dorsey going, hey, they just arrested him. So wow. It was just, there did seem to be a real delay there, but I think that they were being strategic and making sure that they got everybody locked into their grand jury testimony so that they can utilize that later if necessary. So hopefully they've got all their I's dotted and T's crossed and are ready to go and see where this heads next.
Keffe D also wrote about the night of Tupac Shakur's murder in his self-published book, Compton Street Legend. Keffe D wrote in the book that he tossed the Glock in the back seat and made eye contact with Suge Knight. Knight was driving a black BMW. Tupac was in the passenger seat. Keffe D wrote, like two rams locking horns, Suge and I looked each other dead in the eye. The terrified expression on Suge's face read, damn them N-words. One of my guys from the back seat grabbed the Glock and started busting back. Keffe D said he and Suge Knight knew one another from Compton.
One thing about this, he has been on YouTube and some other outlets basically saying, I hate the way that went down, things of that nature. I think he said that, he liked Tupac's music, and it's almost like he was speaking regretfully that this had happened, but he's now accused of being the person who ordered the hit. Do you think he really does regret that? I mean, he seemed to be living a pretty nice life in Henderson, Nevada.
No, I don't think he has true regret like you and I might have regret. He doesn't carry that same type of remorse. He doesn't have that same type of regard for human life. So no, I don't think that he has that type of regret. In fact, when we interviewed him, and he said after the shooting, after they'd shot Tupac, they went and parked the car and they were heading back to their hotel. They're at an intersection, and the ambulance was coming by that was rushing Tupac to the hospital, and him and his friends were just laughing about it. So no, I don't think that he has any true remorse. I think it's time has finally come for him to answer for his sins.
Aside from Keffe D, there's only one other witness who's still alive who knows what happened that night. It's Suge Knight, who's serving a 28-year prison sentence for running a man down and killing him in Compton.
Suge Knight has credibility issues. He's in prison for a really long time. Do we possibly hear from Suge Knight at some point about this?
I would be absolutely shocked if Suge Knight was ever brought into court as a witness. He's completely unbelievable. He's not credible, and he's not going to, from prison, become a rat. He's not going to take the stand and testify against somebody else and then go back to his prison cell in general population. So no, he will. I don't think we're going to see any of Suge Knight in regards to this trial.
What is clear, Duane Keffe D. Davis is sitting in a Las Vegas jail cell where he's being held without bail.
History has finally been set correct. Now it's no longer, from the public perspective, an unsolved case. Now we can close it. Tupac can rest in peace, and we can move on. And now we know that that mystery's been solved.
Duane Davis will appear in court Wednesday morning in Las Vegas for an arraignment. At that time, he will enter a plea to the charges, and a trial date could be set. And I will be there, and I will bring you the very latest from Las Vegas. That's it for this edition of Law and Crime Sidebar Podcast. You can listen to and download Sidebar on Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, you can always watch it on Law and Crime's YouTube channel. I'm Angenette Levy, and we will see you next time.